Lecture 10, Persuasive Speaking. The definition of persuasive speaking is a speech designed to influence listeners' beliefs, opinions, or actions. Now, most people do a certain amount of persuading every day, even though they may not call it that. Benefits of persuasive speaking range from personal relationships to career aspirations to civic deliberations. Persuasion motivates people to adopt a specific manner of thinking or doing something. In persuasive speaking, speakers keep persuasive goals in mind for the audience to number one, believe a claim is true, number two, share opinion on an issue, or number three, to do something. Let's talk about the first of the speaker's goals in persuasive speaking, which are beliefs. This is perceptions about what is true or false, accurate or inaccurate. Second of the speaker's goals, opinions, involves evaluations of good or bad. And third of the speaker's goals when delivering persuasive speeches is actions, okay, which is a behavior that someone undertakes. Now, there are 4 reasons listeners are persuaded. They are high credibility, or scientific term ethos, reasoning or logos, evidence, and a speaker's emotional appeal, or we also refer to that as pathos. Let's start talking about number 1 of the 4 reasons listeners are persuaded, which is high credibility or ethos. This is the audience's attitude toward or perception of the speaker. Now, high credibility is influenced by 2 primary factors: competence and character. Competence is how an audience regards a speaker's intelligence, expertise, and knowledge. Character is how an audience regards a speaker's sincerity, their trustworthiness, and their concern for the well-being of the audience. If your intent is not thought to be genuine, you will have a problem with establishing good character. Now, there's 3 types of credibility that you can have: initial, derived, or terminal. Initial credibility is the audience's perception of the speaker before the speech begins. Derived credibility is the audience's perception of everything a speaker says and does during the speech. And terminal credibility is the audience's perception of the speaker at the end of the speech. Now, there's 3 ways that we can enhance our credibility. You can explain your competence, establish common ground, and deliver speeches fluently, expressively, and with conviction. Explaining your competence. You need to stress research on the topic. Okay? When you are trying to explain your competence, stress the research that you've done on that topic. And you want to also stress special knowledge of the topic through personal experience. To establish common ground, you need to show respect for and identify with the audience's values and beliefs. And it's important for us to establish this common ground in the introduction of the persuasive speech, right up front. And when we are delivering fluent, expressive, and with conviction, we give special attention to good speech organization, to appropriate, clear, and vivid language, and we present a dynamic delivery. Number 2 of the 4 reasons listeners are persuaded is reasoning or logos. This is the process of drawing a conclusion based on evidence rather than emotion or intuition. Evidence. Now, there are 2 concerns for the speaker when we are delivering a persuasive speech using reasoning. We must be concerned that the reasoning is sound and solid. It's solid. And that the listeners already agree with you, that the listeners do agree with your reasoning. Okay, you have to be concerned about this when you are using reasoning as a method to persuade people. Now, there are 2 ways that speakers reason. You either reason with inductive reasoning or deductive reasoning. With inductive reasoning, we consider the evidence and then we draw a general conclusion from the evidence. Okay, an example of that is a doctor diagnosing a patient's illness. The process is that the patient gives their symptoms to the doctor. The doctor runs a series of tests. He reviews your medical history, and based on all of the evidence that the doctor gathers, he or she makes a diagnosis of your condition. Okay, so you start with the evidence and then bring a conclusion. Deductive reasoning, on the other hand, starts the opposite way with a general conclusion. And then you use that conclusion to explain specific individual cases. Now, when we are using deductive reasoning, we often make use of what's called a syllogism. Now, this is a 3-lined argument consisting of a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion, regardless of the validity of these 3-lined arguments. Here's an example. Okay, so we start off with the major premise. Remember, we have these 3 things: a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. So the major premise starts out with all fruits contain seeds. The minor premise goes on to say that tomatoes are fruits. So from this major and minor premise, we conclude, therefore, tomatoes contain seeds. Now here's another one where the major premise would be all dogs are animals. The minor premise, all animals have 4 legs. Therefore, your conclusion might be all dogs have 4 legs. A third one, okay, and keep in mind about the validity of the premises. A major premise might be all mothers are women. Minor premise, Lucy is a woman. Therefore, the conclusion, Lucy is a mother. But we know somehow that's not always true, right? You can be a woman, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you are a mother. You can be a dog that's supposed to have 4 legs, but perhaps the dog had an accident and now it only has 3 because it lost one. Now, in a valid syllogism, if both the major and minor premises are true, then the conclusion logically must be true. When we use syllogisms to persuade, we must first establish the accuracy of the premises. In example 1, everyone may not believe that tomatoes are fruits, but rather are vegetables. So you're going to have to be very, very clear in convincing them that a tomato is a vegetable. Is a fruit and not a vegetable. In this case, the speaker might want to use an authority or expert to support that claim. Okay, because they might not listen to you because a lot of people really believe that tomatoes are vegetables. So you're going to have to get some type of nutritionist expert, agricultural expert, someone maybe, get some FDA certification and evidence to prove that you're not just making this up. This is not just your opinion. This is fact by the experts who have actually done the research to provide this clear evidence that what we are saying and arguing is true. Now, deductive reasoning can also be used with an enthymeme. Now, this is a syllogism where one of the premises is already so widely known and accepted that it isn't mentioned. Okay. An example would be the famous quote of, "I think, therefore I am." Okay. Where the major premise is not necessarily stated. Okay. Because it's known, accepted fact that anyone who thinks must exist. If you're thinking, you are existing. Okay. So I think, therefore I am takes the position that the major premise is so well known that we don't even have to mention it. Enthymemes can be just as persuasive as full syllogisms, but only if listeners accept the validity of both the omitted premise and the stated one. Now, number 3 of the 4 reasons listeners are persuaded is evidence. And evidence consists of examples, statistics, narratives, and testimony used to prove or disprove something. Speakers must support their views with evidence. Strong evidence is particularly important. Okay, so it's not just that you have evidence, but it needs to be strong. When a speaker isn't an expert on a topic, especially, okay, so this is not giving a speech on yourself, introducing yourself, where you are the expert in yourself. Okay, now when you are giving a speech, you need to, especially when you're trying to persuade people, if you're not an expert on that topic, you need to get evidence that comes from an expert. okay? Or when you are targeting an audience that opposes your point of view. You have to make sure that that evidence is strong enough to bring them around or persuade them around to your way of thinking. Now, there are 4 tips that we use to use evidence effectively. Okay, so these numbers here on the side, once I load this into, but for some reason it goes in and changes numbers randomly. So these numbers should be 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the 4 tips to use evidence effectively. Number 1, use specific evidence, not general terms. Number 2, use novel evidence. Number 3, use evidence from credible sources. And number 4, make clear the point of your evidence. Okay, this is very important. And I'm going to say it again. All right, to use your evidence effectively, the first thing, one of the things you need to do is you need to use specific evidence, not general terms. You need to use novice evidence, new stuff, new information. You need to use evidence from credible sources. Okay, we need to make certain that it follows that crap test we talked about from within the library tour, and you want to make clear the point of the evidence. Just remember, whenever you say something that is open to question, you should give evidence to prove that you are right. Strong evidence enhances your credibility. It increases both immediate and long-term persuasiveness of your message, and it helps to inoculate the listeners against counter-arguments. Number 4 of the 4 reasons listeners are persuaded is through emotional appeals or pathos. Emotional appeal is when the audience is touched by a speaker's ideas or their language. Okay, is it intended to make listeners feel sad or angry or guilty or fearful, reverent, or the like? Now, there are 3 ways that we generate emotional appeal. And here's one of these examples again, where it's just automatically, Blackboard is automatically changing my numbers. So this should be number 1. Emotionally charged language is one of the 3 ways to generate emotional appeal. Okay, emotions are attached to particular words that we use. You want to be certain that your emotional language is consistent with the rest of your speech. Don't just throw in these emotional words because you think, oh yeah, this is great. It needs to fit well with the rest of the speech. Number 2 of the 3 ways to generate emotional appeal is through vivid examples. Okay, they add impact. When you use these vivid examples, they bring ideas home to listeners in personal terms, and they make a speech more compelling. And the 3rd way that we generate emotional appeal is with sincerity and conviction. Speakers who feel the emotion themselves will communicate that emotion through everything they say and do in the speech. We talk about sincerity and when we talk about emotional appeal, we see all of these types of emotional appeal arguments on TV commercials that appeal to our natural instincts to love and protect children and pets. We've seen all of these commercials, right? Where they have the sad look of the animals who have been abused, and the animal rights uh, organizations are asking for money. To get that money out of your pocket, they've got to be convincing. That vivid example, sincerity, and conviction that they're using, it's all done to lure you in and get you to part with your beloved money. Okay? We see it with Save the Children and all of the organizations that try to appeal to your emotional side. You have to be ethical when you are using emotional appeal. So don't forget, go back to where we were talking about ethical obligations. They are extremely, extremely important when you are trying to persuade someone. You have to be honest. Remember, that was one of you have to be honest in what you say. Ethical obligations. Okay. Here they are. They are so especially challenging in persuasion. Okay. You have to be ethical when you are being persuasive. So these are the guidelines for ethical obligations when trying to persuade your audience. Number one, you want to make sure your goals are ethically sound. Okay, remember we talked about ethics. They deal with issues of right or wrong, moral or immoral. Okay. You want to study the topic thoroughly, understand the information that you are reporting on. You want to learn about all sides of an issue and make sure you get the facts right. Number four, be honest in what you say. I can't say it enough. Okay? Because once people catch on to a person being dishonest in what they're saying, trying to persuade you to do something or think something, and what they're telling you is dishonest, first of all, your good character goes out of the window. Okay, you're no longer competent. You're not competent. Okay, you're a fraud. And your ability to persuade people is totally lost. And if people don't believe you, you're done. So be honest in what you say. Number five, you want to guard against subtle forms of dishonesty. Okay. For example, quoting out of context, portraying a few details as the whole story. Okay. Leaving stuff out that you know is important. If you told people this, it may change their minds or their belief in you. Okay. And then you don't want to misrepresent your sources. Okay. You don't want to say that you got this from an expert when the person might just be a quack. And lastly, you want to present evidence fairly and accurately. Be clear about what you are speculating. Keep in mind the power of language and employ it responsibly. You want to respect the right of free speech and expression. You want to avoid name calling and other forms of abusive language. And if you're using emotional appeal, be appropriate to the topic and support your ideas by using facts and figures. Now, there's three types of persuasive propositions. Persuasive speeches address these three propositions: question of fact, question of value, and question of policy. Okay, we're going to talk about question of fact first. These persuasive speeches on question of fact seek to persuade an audience to accept the speaker's view of the facts on a particular issue. Now, some questions of fact can be answered with certainty. For example, how far is it from New York to Dubai? That is a specific, certain answer. But other questions of fact cannot be answered with certainty. Will the economy be better or worse in 6 months? Now, persuasive speeches on question of fact look a whole lot like informative speeches, and students often confuse the two. However, persuasive speeches on question of fact differ from informative speeches. Okay, and this is how. Informative speeches use an impartial view. They take an impartial view on a subject. They don't argue for any particular point of view. They give you the facts and just the facts. Persuasive speeches on question of fact, however, give a partisan view. Okay? They try to persuade the audience to accept the speaker's view about the information. Okay, so they take a side. Persuasive speeches on question of fact take sides. Okay, informative speeches, on the other hand, do not. So some key terms you'd look for in a persuasive speech on question of fact might be something like the benefits of something. You have to be careful that you're not giving you might try to give an informative speech talking about the benefits of exercise. Okay, yes, these are facts when you are talking about the benefits of exercise. However, if you were given an informative speech, the way that you would present some information like that would be a whole lot different than if you were trying to persuade someone around to starting to exercise. Okay, it's a very different view that you are taking in terms of strictly giving the facts or encouraging someone to do something. Okay, those are two different things. Okay, you're giving a person a choice when you're telling them you're giving them when you're giving an informative speech, as opposed to a persuasive speech on question of fact. You're really trying to persuade the person around to your way of thinking on it, which would be, when we take that topic of exercise, you want to get them to start exercising. You want people to start exercising. So that speech that you're giving, if that intent is to try to get people to start exercising, it's not an informative speech. Okay, it's a persuasive speech on question of fact. And it's very important that you know the difference between the two. because there are certain things that you would do in an informative speech by trying to stay impartial when you're giving the facts, as opposed to what you would do in a persuasive speech on question of fact when you're trying to convince them to do something. A lot different. Persuasive speeches on question of fact are organized topically, where each main point will present a reason why the audience should agree with the speaker. So you want to make sure you subdivide the topic logically and consistently. Now, the second of the three types of persuasive proposition is persuasive speeches on question of value. These require judgments based on a person's belief about what is right or wrong, good or bad, moral or immoral, etc. Now, speakers need to justify their value judgment in light of a clearly defined set of standards when they are using persuasive speeches on question of value. And when we do this, there's two steps. The first thing you want to do is define the speaker's standards for the value judgment. And then you judge the subject of the speech against those standards that you've defined. Persuasive speeches on question of value are organized topically. Okay. Where the first main establishes standards for the speaker's value judgment, and the second main point applies those standards to the speech topic. Now, the third of the three types of persuasive propositions for persuasive speeches are question of policy. Now, most persuasive speeches deal with this question of policy proposition. Okay? And they deal with specific courses of action. Okay? They deal with specific courses of action. These persuasive speeches on question of policy deal with specific courses of action. They inevitably involve question of fact when you're dealing with when you're presenting a persuasive speech on question of policy. You're going to involve question of fact. Okay? And you may also involve question of value. What's good or bad? Okay. But these persuasive speeches on question of policy always go beyond question of fact and question of value to decide whether something should or should not be done. Okay, that's what separates it apart. You go beyond this question of fact. You go beyond whether it's right or wrong. You want that listener to decide what should or shouldn't be done. That's the crux of these persuasive speeches on question of policy. Now, there's two types of persuasive speeches on question of policy. The first type is one that seeks to gain passive agreement that a policy is desirable, necessary, and practical. Okay? In this type of speech, the aim is to affect the thinking of the listener. And the speaker does not try to get the listeners to take any action in support of the policy. Okay? So you just want them to think differently. Gain passive agreement that the policy that you're presenting, okay, is desirable, necessary, and practical. The second type of these persuasive speeches on question of policy is one that seeks to motivate the audience to take action. So one is that you want them to think differently. The other one is that you want them to do something. Okay, now this type of speech, when you want them to do something, aims to get the audience to do something in support of whatever that policy is you are presenting. When seeking immediate action, speakers should make their recommendations for action as specific as possible. So you don't just urge listeners to do something, but you tell them exactly what to do and how to do it. So if you're giving someone a speech about the importance of going out to register to vote, that you want someone to vote. Say your whole speech is the thing you want them to do is go out and vote. You want to persuade people to vote. Okay, you have to explain what they have to do. Now, the first thing they need to do is register. You can't vote if you don't register, right? You have to tell them step by step, and those steps must be very clear and very accurate. And you need to start at the beginning, go all the way through, and end with the end. When you are trying to persuade someone with one of these propositions, specifically question of policy, don't just tell them what to do. Don't just tell them to do something. Tell them what they have to do and how to do it. Now, these persuasive speeches on question of policy must address three basic needs. They are the need, the plan, and the practicality. Very important. Okay. Now, the first basic issue is need. So if you are advocating a change in policy, you have to prove that there is a need for change. Change for policy, prove there's a need for change. If you oppose a change in policy, then you must prove that there is no need for change. The number two basic issue for question of policy is the plan. So you've established either you want a change in policy or you don't want a change in policy. Okay, we've established that. Now we go on to the basic issue of the plan. So after we show that there's a need for change, a persuasive speaker must offer a specific plan or policy that's going to solve the need that we identified initially. The speaker should be as specific as time allows in identifying the major features of the plan or the policy. Now, number three of these basic issues for persuasive speeches on question of policy is practicality. So if you are advocating a new policy, the plan, it must prove that the plan is workable and will solve the need without creating new problems. That's key. Okay, my plan works, it's going to solve the need, and it's not going to create any new problems. If you are opposing a new plan, you must argue that the plan is impractical. Okay, this new plan that's coming forth impractical, and it's going to create new problems. When we are considering this third basic issue of practicality, the amount of time that we devote to the need, to the plan, and to the practicality, we have to do this. It depends on the topic and the audience. So the amount of time we devote to each one of these issues in any speech that we give is going to depend on the topic and the audience. Now, there are 4 patterns that we use, patterns of organization that we use for persuasive propositions. The first one is problem solution order. And these are speeches that advocate change in policy naturally, and they fall into these problem solution order. Okay. With problem solution order patterns, the first main point shows the need for a new policy by providing the existence of a serious problem. And then the second main point is going to present a plan for solving the problem and demonstrates its practicality. These problem solution order speeches that oppose change in policy can also be organized in problem solution order. Okay, where the first main point shows there is no need for a change or new policy. And then the second main point shows that if there were a need, the proposed new policy would not solve the problem and would create serious new problems of its own. The second pattern of organization for these persuasive propositions on question of policy is problem call solution order. And these are speeches that, when we have speeches that follow this method, they have 3 main points. So the problem solution order had 2 main points, right? Problem call solution order naturally follows 3 main points. Okay, where the first main point shows the existence of the problem, the second main point analyzes the causes of the problem, and the third main point presents a solution to the problem. Problem call solution order make it easier to check whether the proposed solution will get at the causes of the problem rather than merely controlling the symptoms. Number 3 of these 4 patterns is comparative advantages. Now, this pattern of organization is most effective when the audience already agrees that there's a need for the new policy. So, for example, you're giving a speech to college students, and you want to convince them that we need to get together and stop the increase in our school tuition. You've just learned that tuition's going up, and you want to get students together to protest this. Okay? I don't think you'll find many students who don't already agree that they don't want to pay more money for tuition. So in that case, right, you're not going to spend as much time on the need, okay, than you would in a speech where perhaps a new Walmart's coming to your area, okay, and you are on one side or the other opposing it or advocating for it. Okay, so the change is that, hey, we're getting a new Walmart here. Well, everybody might not agree that that new Walmart is the best thing for our community. Okay, because there's pros and cons on each side. Some people might not want a new Walmart because they feel the traffic patterns may change and cause more congestion. They may feel, oh, that's more people coming into our neighborhood, more congestion. Maybe that's causing more pollution. Maybe more people around here in our neighborhood is going to cause more traffic congestion. It's going to cause increased crime. They may say, "Oh, we're bringing more people here. These people not we don't know these people are coming here. We feel so might be more crime coming here now that we have all these more people coming here." So, while some people may argue that bringing a new Walmart is going to bring a bigger rateable, that's going to make our taxes go down. Okay, it's more convenient. We don't have to go travel far if we want to go to this area. So, in these cases, where the audience already agrees with you, you're going to want to use comparative advantages. They work better in your ability to persuade. All right. And the fourth type of patterns of organization for persuasive propositions on question of policy is the Monroe's motivated sequence. And this is a way of organizing a persuasive speech consisting of appeals to attention, need satisfaction, visualization, and then action. Okay. Now, the first step in Monroe's motivated sequence or pattern of organization is to gain the attention of the audience. Then the second thing you do is show the need for change. The third step is to satisfy the sense of need by presenting a plan that will remedy the need. And finally, a fourth step is to visualize the benefits and practicality of the plan. The fifth step is to urge the audience to take action in support of the plan. Monroe's motivated sequence is psychologically based. And because it is psychologically based, it's especially valuable for persuasive speeches that seek immediate action. In the end, you want to keep in mind that it takes skill and strategy to deliver an effective speech. Okay. Adapting to your audience, building rapport with your audience, establishing your credibility. Always remember that a good way to develop your speaking skills is to know your purpose and study excellent speech examples. And this concludes Lecture 10, Persuasive Speaking.